creaking of the swing. It was the month of October. The air was crisp and Halloween was just around the corner. My friends and I had gathered in a circle, huddled around a fire, sharing stories of the supernatural. As we took turns telling our tales, I was reminded of a terrifying experience that had happened to me just a year prior. At the time, my family and I lived in a house in San Antonio, surrounded by dense woods. While I had experienced multiple jump scares in the past, they were always easily explainable. Perhaps it was the outline of trees in the dark that had appeared to take on a sinister shape, or the glowing eyes of a wild animal that had sent shivers down my spine. However, on this particular night, something felt different. As I recounted the experience to my friends, I realized that I had never fully shared the details with anyone before. The memory was still fresh in my mind, and as I spoke, I transported myself back to that eerie night. It was a calm and quiet weekend evening, and as I didn't have to worry about going to school the next day, I decided to spend my free time watching my favorite cartoon program. The TV was on, and I was lying comfortably on the living room couch, fully immersed in the show. The episode was about to end, and I started feeling drowsy, but I was determined to watch it till the end. Just then, I heard a creaking sound coming from outside the house. It was unmistakably the sound of the old swing on our porch. The swing was so old and rusty that nobody ever used it, which made me feel a bit nervous. The sound of the swing moving back and forth continued, making me increasingly scared as I wondered who could be causing it. I decided to gather the courage to investigate the noise source. Slowly, I got up from the couch and started to creep towards the living room's bay windows. I peeked through the windows, trying to get a glimpse of the porch. Fear and anticipation were overwhelming as I tried to figure out what was causing the swing to move. It was a moonless night, and I could barely see anything. But a faint outline of a dark figure sitting on the swing was visible. The swing area was not illuminated, so I couldn't make out who it was. The person was leaning on the swing and gazing up at the sky. I squinted my eyes to take a closer look, and noticed the silhouette of long dark hair, making me think it must be a woman. A sudden feeling of unease washed over me as I stared in her direction. As I watched her, I noticed she was holding something in her hand, but I couldn't tell what it was. Suddenly, the swing stopped, and the woman sat up straight before, standing up with a sudden jolt and turning her head towards me. She was wearing a nightgown, and the object in her hand was a kitchen knife laced with blood. As I gazed into her eyes, I couldn't help but notice the intense gleam that emanated from them. It was almost as if they were reflecting a light source, but there was no light in the area. As I took a closer look at her, I realized that I had never felt such an overwhelming fear in my entire life. Every fiber of my being told me something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in grave danger. My body was consumed with fear as I witnessed something terrifying. I attempted to scream, but my voice was stifled by the fear that gripped me. Without a second thought, I bolted towards my mother, who was nearby. My heart pounded as I tried to communicate what I had just seen. However, my attempts to speak were fruitless, and the only word I could muster was porch. My mom noticed the panic in my eyes and tried to soothe me while asking what was wrong. Despite all my efforts, I couldn't articulate the details of what I had just witnessed. Sweat poured down my face, and I frantically pointed toward the door. Finally, my mother comprehended that something was wrong and rushed to investigate. Mom walked to the front door, and I followed her, fearing she could get in danger. As we reached the door, I held my breath when she opened it, but it was strange that nothing was there. Her eyes scanned the area for a few minutes, but I couldn't see anything. The creepy woman wasn't there, almost as if she had never existed. My mom kept asking me what it was and why I was so panicked, but I just stood there frozen, staring at our porch swing. Eventually, Mom closed the door, took me to the kitchen, and handed me water to calm down. When I was finally able to speak, I tried telling her, but it wasn't due to my voice that I couldn't. Instead, I doubted myself, thinking what I saw was my overactive imagination. Mom didn't ask me anything again, letting me feel at ease until I was ready to tell her myself. It had been nearly 2 hours since we first noticed Father's absence, and my mother and I were still sitting in the living room, anxiously awaiting his return. When we finally heard the sound at the front door opening, we both looked up eagerly, hoping to see his familiar face. However, the expression that greeted us was far from what we had expected. Father looked troubled and preoccupied, and it was clear that something was bothering him deeply. As my mother got up to take his coat, she asked him if everything was all right, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at us briefly and took a deep breath before speaking. "There has been a murder in the neighborhood." The image of that woman holding a knife flashed as those words entered my ears.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Animal or monster? After spending several hours setting up the spiderweb decoration in my yard for Halloween, I was feeling both pleased with myself and eager to finish the job. As I surveyed my work, I realized that some green liquid slime was the final touch to complete the spooky scene. As I scanned the yard, I thought maybe I could add more creepiness to what I had done there. I quickly consulted my mental list of Halloween decorations needed, from spooky lights to creepy jack-o'-lanterns, and remembered that Jimmy's store was the best place to get it. Thinking of completing my decorating task, I got into my car and prepared to drive the 3 miles to Jimmy's store. However, as I started the engine, I noticed the fuel gauge was dangerously low, showing only a sliver of fuel left. Knowing that my car wouldn't make it to Jimmy's and back without running out of gas, I decided to fill up my tank quickly at the gas station just a few meters away. As I drove towards the gas station, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The fuel gauge in my car was about to be empty, and I didn't want to risk running out of gas before reaching my destination. I kept a careful eye on the gauge, watching as the needle crept closer and closer to empty. Finally, I spotted a gas station up ahead and breathed a sigh of relief. Pulling into the station, I noticed no other cars around. It was nighttime, and the silence added to the eerie atmosphere. I got out of my car and began filling up the tank, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the area looking for signs of life, but no one was in sight. The only sounds were the hum of the gas pump and the rustle of leaves in the wind. As I continued to fill up my tank, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. The minutes ticked by slowly, and the silence only grew more oppressive. It felt like an eternity before my tank was finally full. As I was about to enter my car, I noticed a small fox standing a few feet away, staring at me intently. I couldn't help but notice that she was unusually small and incredibly cute, with eyes bigger than any fox I had ever seen. I froze for a moment to take in the sight of this charming animal, but then I remembered that I had a habit of feeding stray dogs whenever I would go out, so I thought I could give her a treat too. I had some jerky treats in my car, so I took them out and threw them in her direction. The fox looked at me for a few seconds, almost as if she was about to say something, before she stepped forward, sniffed the jerky, and started eating. It was interesting that she only ate the clean ones and left the ones covered in dirt untouched. As she ate, I took out my phone and started filming her, hoping to show the video to others later. But then, something strange happened. The fox suddenly stopped eating, looked at me, and took a majestic leap inside my car. At first I was surprised but not frightened. I thought the fox just wanted to explore my car, but as I saw the back of her head, I froze in fear. The fox had another face behind her head. It was a surreal sight that I couldn't believe my eyes. I wondered if I was hallucinating, but the second face was still there staring at me. I tried to stay calm and think rationally, but my heart was pounding, and my mind was racing with questions. If someone else were to hear my account of what happened, I'm certain they'd be convinced that I was spouting nonsense, and would say something along the lines, "What in the name of Voldemort are you talking about?" But I swear on my life that what I saw was real. The fox had two faces. At first I couldn't believe my eyes. How could a creature possibly have two faces? My mind raced for a logical explanation, and I even came up with the idea that the fox might be a product of a vanishing twin syndrome, where one twin consumes the other before birth. But as soon as I thought this, the second face disappeared before my eyes, leaving me frozen and petrified. The fox then turned towards me, and I swear its eyes were piercing through me, as if it were threatening me. I was terrified, and I felt a lump form in my throat. Suddenly, the fox leaped out of my car with the same majesty with which it had entered. Yet I couldn't help but find it creepy, as I was left shaken and disturbed. As soon as I saw the strange creature walking away, I felt my heart racing and my body tensing up. I wasted no time and quickly ran towards my car, fumbling with the keys to unlock the door. Once inside, I took a deep breath and started the engine, the sound of the car providing a small sense of safety. I glanced at the rearview mirror, making sure the creature was nowhere in sight, before stepping on the gas and speeding away, leaving the eerie scene behind. As I drove away from the gas station, I couldn't help but keep glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Multiple questions surged through my mind. What kind of creature was that? Was it dangerous? Should I report it to someone? I pulled out my phone to watch the video I had recorded of the fox, but what I saw made my blood run cold. The video was empty. There was no sign of the fox with two faces. It was as if the creature had never been there, or I had never filmed it. As memories of that spine-chilling creature flood my mind, I ponder the plausibility of the age-old myth about the souls of the departed returning on Halloween night, and the existence of numerous other monsters that supposedly roam the earth on that day. The mere thought of it sends shivers down my spine, and I cannot help but wonder if there is any truth to these tales.
I was about 14 years old, and my family had just moved to a new town. I was also lucky enough to make a fast friend at my new school, and we subsequently made plans to go trick-or-treating together since it was coming up to Halloween night. Because we were 14 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents told us that they didn't think I needed to chaperone that year. So while everything was going great and we were having fun getting some solid candy, it was kind of cool just walking around our own, feeling sort of grown up. We knock at one house and this middle-aged man opened the door. He seemed happy to see my new friend and me, so I assumed we were in for some grade A candy. I don't actually remember what candy he handed out, but I didn't remember what happened next. He asked us to come inside, which is weird, but we really wanted candy. So I guess we were dumb enough to take the bait. It disappears for a moment, and I kind of assumed that he was going to get us some candy. But when he re-emerges, he doesn't have any, only a camera in his hand. Then he asked if he could take a couple of pictures of us, explaining they like to take photos of kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes, how he was something of a collector. At this point, even being a fairly naive 14-year-old, I got weirded out, yet knew it was best not to upset the man and let them take the picture, and then we could leave. So he takes the photo of us, waits for the Polaroid to come out, then he hands us a pen, asks us to sign our names on the back. Me and my new friend did as we were told, but although we'd been dumb enough to actually go into this guy's house with him, we weren't dumb enough to sign our actual names, so we wrote fake ones on the back just to satisfy him. Only then were we allowed to leave with the candy that he gave us after we signed. I don't know if this guy was on some sort of list or some sort of offender or anything like that. There were no more run-ins with them, and nothing in the way of rumors going around town. But I still get creeped out thinking about what he did with that photo of me.
In my early 20s, I went through a wandering stage. I had just graduated from college and couldn't find a job anywhere. Rather than go a couple $100 into the hole every month paying for rent while searching for a job, I decided to pack up with my few belongings I owned and headed out to see the country. And this is something I cannot recommend enough. Stay off the interstates, pop a train from time to time, and hitchhike with no particular destination in mind. It was this kind of aimless wandering that led me to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. If you've never experienced them, the Barrens are an amazing place. Huge stands of oak and evergreen trees, many older than time itself, grow out of that strange, sickly soil. Sugar sand, the locals call it in the rainy season, that forms quicksand. And then the dry season, it can still swallow farm machinery whole. Of the few farms that I saw, they all looked like they had seen better times, and many looked like they had sat untouched for decades. There was something alluring about that place, a sort of ancient secret I was afforded glimpses of in the shadows when the wind stirred the trees, the sort of movement at the edge of your vision that follows you throughout the day, but disappears as soon as you turn your head. From time to time, I hiked down old dusty roads. An old pickup truck or a rusted-out car would bound over a hill toward me. Most times, the driver would eye me suspiciously and speed up as they approached. Occasionally, the driver would stop to talk to me for a few minutes. "What are you doing out here?" one old toothless man clad in overalls asked me wandering around. "Seeing what there is to see," I replied. The old man spat out a putrid brown stream into the dust. "Ain't nothing to see around here." When I asked the old man what he meant by that, he made a guttural, throaty sound. I wasn't sure if he was choking on his tobacco or bothered by the question, but he didn't answer. He offered me a ride in his pickup the way that I had come back into town. But when I declined, he spat out into the dirt again and sped off, shaking his head. My eventual plan was to make it to Delaware sometime that summer and meet up with some extended family there, but I was in no hurry. In truth, I had been in heaven these last few weeks, taking my time heading south and exploring anything that caught my eye. I had explored every abandoned building and every cave I had seen. I had half my weight in power bars in my backpack. But over the last 2 months, I had honed my skills at trapping rabbits and gathering wild edibles. sitting up late at night beside my campfire and sleeping beneath the stars. The night sky in an area so devoid of human influence is beyond comprehension. But tonight, there were clouds moving in, and the sun was disappearing faster than I had grown accustomed to. When the deep roar of thunder shook the valley, I knew that I had better find shelter. In the failing sunlight, I could see in the distance some structures at the top of the hill. I ran the half-mile distance and was disappointed to see that the ancient house and barn were in terrible shape. The roof of the barn had been completely collapsed, and the upper 2 floors of this 3-story house had collapsed into a mangle of ancient wood. Still, the house was my best option, so I made my way toward it as the heavens began to open up. As I'd seen on other properties in the area, this house had a small cemetery in the yard. I ran toward the gaping front door of the dilapidated house, carefully making my way between the headstones. When lightning flashed, I was able to make out the name on several of the headstones, which the elements hadn't completely erased. When they got inside, the floor was spongy, but felt solid enough to hold my weight. I took off my pack and set it near the door, caught my breath, and had a look around. The hinges of the front door had long since rusted away, but I was able to fit the door back into the opening enough to hopefully keep the wind and rain out. At one end of the room, there was a stone fireplace and chimney which was solidly constructed, but I had no wood for a fire. Next to the fireplace was a stairwell full of rubble and cobwebs. I didn't dare apply my weight to those steps, as many had rotted to nothing under their own pitiful weight. Opposite the front door was an opening to an old kitchen of sorts, but when I tried to approach it, my foot went clean through the floor, and I decided to stay put until the storm blew over. The remains of the upper floor did an adequate job of keeping the ground floor dry, and I was able to arrange my sleeping bag so that very little water draining from the upper floors managed to land on it. I got out my harmonica and played for a few minutes, then stopped, apprehensive. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but something had chilled me to my core. Outside, the storm had continued to build in intensity. My eyes were focused on that stairwell, seeing nothing in darkness, and flash blinded when lightning struck. I must have fallen asleep at some point because suddenly I came to with a searing pain in my neck from leaning my head against the wall for so long. Outside, the storm continued to pound down its fury upon Earth. As I sat there, rubbing my neck, and began to chuckle to myself for getting wrapped up in the superstition of the area when I heard it. At first, I heard indiscriminate movement of stairs and the ruins of the upper 2 floors. I was just about to write it off as rats when suddenly it stopped. I froze in place, daring only to move my eyes, and even then, just barely. After 30 seconds of paralytic fear, I smiled at myself again and was just about to settle into my sleeping bag when I looked toward the stairs. At the top of the doorway were a pair of glowing red orbs staring directly at me. Very slowly, they closed down to horizontal slits, then opened up again wider than before. I can't tell you how long I sat there staring at it, staring at me. It could have been a second. It could have been hours. And eventually, my lower-level self-preservation skills began to kick in, and subconsciously, I started reaching for the knife on my belt. Our eyes locked. My hand progressed inch by inch towards my only means of defending myself. Neither of us blinked for what felt like hours, and while the storm raged on, I prayed for another lightning strike so that I might even catch a glimpse of my adversary. But despite the ferocity of the rain, the darkness was absolute. When, at last, my hand reassuringly touched the hilt of my knife, it seemed as if the very fabric of existence was ripped to shreds. The creature began bellowing in the most unearthly, mind-numbing shriek I'd ever heard. Knowing I only had one chance, in one fluid motion, I released the snap that held my knife in place and released an inside overhand throw that I had practiced during my years of my misspent adolescence. I heard a sickening, wet thunk, and the shrieking increased in volume 100-fold. As I smashed that rotten door to pieces, I heard the creature flapping against the wall and screaming. Just as I wrenched the remains of the door open, a great flash of lightning struck. And all around the house, I saw piles of bones, feathers, and fur. I ran as I had never run before, since I ran into my veins pumped acid and my limbs were stone. I couldn't see where I was going, but I could follow the dirt roads by the sounds of the sugar sand slipping roadside debris into the ditches. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. When the sun finally rose, I collapsed in the middle of the road. Heaving, oblivious to the downpour, I awoke with a startle to the sound of a car horn blaring inches from my head. I leaped to my feet and spun around to see the same old man from yesterday holding his sides with laughter. When I opened my mouth to speak, he motioned with his thumb to the back of his truck. I climbed in without a word, and he began to drive. The events of the previous night had begun to replay themselves in my head. What had just happened? No matter how many times I considered what I saw, none of it made any sense. As we drove, I realized how far I had run in the dark. It must have been nearly 10 miles. I was angry with myself for being so terrified by a dream. And that's the only thing that could have been approached from this angle. Everything fit into place, and experience to false awakening. There's so many times in the past when experimenting with dream herbs, I had a nightmare and woke up with adrenaline pumping and abandoned all of my gear in an old house. I suddenly realized that the truck had sat motionless for quite some time, and the old man was turned around in the seat, staring at me. I looked up at him, and he grinned. With sickening horror, I realized that we were at the bottom of the hill on which that wretched house sat. I jumped out of the pickup and thanked the old man who drove off. I slowly walked up the muddy path that led to the house, composing myself. When I reached the yard, I saw the old piles of bones which had shocked me the previous night during the storm. Of course, there were coyotes and foxes in the area, and I had hunted a couple wild turkeys. The critters probably had their dens around here, and they had been using the house as a windbreak. Inside the house, everything appeared as I had left it. My sleeping bag, my pack, and my harmonica was sitting on the floor, and I could see my knife sticking out of the wall across the room. I packed everything up and put on my backpack, then walked over to the stairs and pulled my knife out of the wall. I was about to return it to the sheath on my belt when I looked at the blade and noticed the dried-on blood and that clump of oily black hair stuck to it.